In the last class that we had, we discussed a beautiful, beautiful idea. It really, I don't want to call it a game changer or just a fascinating idea, and that is that the mitzvah that a person does, regardless of his current status, regardless of his yesterday, regardless of his tomorrow, regardless of his stature, creates a unity like a husband and wife, a perfect moment of oneness. That's incredible. The absolute unity that's created when a man, when a yid, when a Jew, when a woman does a mitzvah, the unity and the bond with God is unimaginable. And the holiness that that person experienced at that time is absolutely unmatched and valued beyond what anyone can understand. And therefore, even if a person yesterday never did a mitzvah and tomorrow doesn't do a mitzvah in their own mind, of course, people are always doing mitzvahs. Nevertheless, the mitzvah you're doing right now places you on a pedestal that is unimaginable. The one time you light a Shabbos candle, the one time you put on tefillin, the one time you say the Shema, has nothing to do with all the lacking or other areas of your life that are lacking. It is an absolute place of tremendous, tremendous holiness. That's what we said last week. Today we're going to say, why don't I feel it? That's today. If that's true, and it is true, that when somebody is doing a mitzvah, at that moment they're in a tremendous state of unity and oneness with Hashem. They're in a tremendous state of holiness. Why don't I feel it? Why don't I feel right now the experience? Why is, I did a mitzvah. I was in such a holy place. Didn't feel it. Didn't know about it. I just felt like I was doing something. Sometimes a person puts on tefillin. It does as a favor to the rabbi who asked him, makes you happy, I'll put on tefillin. It makes you happy, I'll do this, etc. It actually reminds me of an interesting thing, something just in general, which is I found fascinating. And I've never seen an exception to this. One of the things that I do is I always ask people to put on tefillin when I meet them. It's something they're ever strongly encouraged. It's something that I always, in my mind, think, if I don't do it, after 120 years, this person's going to come to me and say, you're a real piece of work. You knew about tefillin. You knew I don't put on tefillin. And you didn't ask me, why not? You didn't want to make yourself uncomfortable. You didn't want to lose me as a friend. Why did you put yourself before me? I need tefillin. I didn't know it. You knew it. Why didn't you ask me? I always play this thing in my head. So I noticed an interesting thing that a lot of times I ask someone to put on tefillin, and in general, I'm not pushy about it. The person doesn't want to, I go to the next thing. But when I ask someone to put on tefillin, a lot of times the person really would rather not, but he says, all right. Without exception, no matter when or where, when I'm done, the person always tells me, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's like, I thought you were doing me a favor. Always the person says either thank you or I really appreciate it or meant a lot, thank you. Why? And I noticed this and I always pay attention to it. And I realize there are things that we know are tremendously meaningful and real, but on a certain part of ourselves, we can't accept it or know about it or touch it. But when we do the mitzvah, the experience actually touches us. Meaning, before I do it, I don't feel the value of it. I don't feel it's important. It could be lighting a Shabbos candle, going to shul, doing someone a favor. When you do it and you're done, the effect on you is phenomenal. It actually, thank you for putting tefillin on me. And it's amazing. Sometimes I'm at an event and I feel so bad. The guy has to take off his cufflink, take off his jacket, roll up his shirt, and it's the whole chef to take off it's a 2.5, 3 minutes of preparation, and I feel bad. The person says, no, thank you. I really appreciate it. So, interesting thing. Okay, we're in chapter 46, towards the end of the chapter, and we are on page, if you're doing the numbers, page 131, towards the bottom of the page. I would say 3/5 down, last word on the line. Here it is. So we said that the truth is that at a time when a person does a mitzvah, regardless of how religious you are, regardless of how involved you are, regardless of how holy you think you are, that makes no difference because we don't really know how these things work. But the bottom line is when you do a mitzvah at that moment, no different, by the way, right now sitting and learning, we have a bunch of us sitting together and learning. This moment of learning Torah connects us with Hashem in a way that we can't even imagine. So he says, this is true and exact this way by every single Jewish person. When you're learning Torah or performing a mitzvah, at that moment, we said that we gave the example in the previous classes, It's like a moment of intimacy between the husband and wife. It's a moment of a kiss, we said, a moment of a hug, a moment of a bonding, which is incredible. And we said much more so by God, whose oneness is much greater than the oneness of two human beings who come together. More like an example of a child that results from a union where the husband and wife really become one in that child. He says that because of this oneness, our sages told us, therefore, we have to stand up and give respect to someone performing a mitzvah. Like I mentioned by a bris, you stand up when the baby comes in. It's not because of the baby, like, hey, the baby's younger than you, have to stand for the baby. It's the mitzvah that's about to take place. Same thing by a funeral, same thing by a wedding, by occasions where a mitzvah is being performed, we all stand up to give respect and honor to the mitzvah. Because the presence of God that is found right now in the soul of the one performing the mitzvah. So whether your name is Mrs. Goldberg or Mr. Jackson, who doesn't need kosher, and maybe you're not performing all the mitzvahs that you think you should be doing, at the moment you're doing a mitzvah, you're in tune with God, like it's Sefer Torah and more, because it's an absolute unity. But now goes the but. The but's not going to minimize, as a contrary, we'll see as we go through this, the but's not going to minimize the truth of this. It's just going to explain why can't we feel it. If it's true, if someone turns on the heater in the room and the heat's on, I feel it. Why don't I feel what's happening here? Something very powerful. The problem is our physical bodies are made of flesh and blood that are coarse, and our bodies are in tune to self and things we see. Everyone in this room, I think I could safely say, benefits from a great gift that God gave us called Wi-Fi. But no one in this room has ever seen Wi-Fi. That I can't say for sure, but I'm assuming. No one has ever seen Wi-Fi. Now, it's not because Wi-Fi is not real. It's because our eyes are not designed to see Wi-Fi. Our phones are. Our phones see the Wi-Fi. Our computers see the Wi-Fi. Our ring on the front door sees the Wi-Fi. We don't see it. We can only see the effect of the Wi-Fi. We can see that now our phone has signal, or our computer has reception. In other words, you have to be designed with the right apparatus and the right vessel to be able to see certain things. And the reality is materialness, coarseness, is a blockage of spirituality. That is the key element of a lot of Chassidus and understanding of Yiddishkeit. The existence of material self is a block and gets in the way of spiritual truth. That's why when we see the world, we can't see godliness. We don't see God that created the universe. We see the universe. We don't see a tzaddik, on the other hand, who is extremely holy and has no self, is one with God because he has no self. His whole existence is insignificant to himself. It's all about Hashem, about purpose, about meaning. But regular people that are very caught up with their own needs, their own feelings, their own desires, their own security or insecurities, we get in the way of seeing godliness. Like a person that can't see Wi-Fi, a human being that's in tune with self can't see godliness. It's not a criticism, it's a fact, it's a concealment, it's a cover. It's like wearing sunglasses, you don't see the sun. Because, especially if we mentioned in the past, welder sunglasses, they're absolute conceal. You can't, it's pitch black outside with welder sunglasses on. Because these conceal what's beyond it. And therefore, the reason why we don't feel it is not because it's not there. It's because we have physical, material coarseness that blocks our ability to see the truth of what's there. And what happens is this coarseness of our body blocks our soul. Even though our identity is our soul, we are our soul, we are our thinking self, that's our spiritual identity. Nevertheless, our physical body, our eyes, our flesh, our coarseness doesn't allow our souls that are in our body right now to see the godliness. So the reason why we don't see it is because we have a disconnect, not because it's not there. And an example will be, we'll see a few examples coming up, but one example may be, this is my own example, so it may not be so accurate, is if God forbid somebody, I remember my grandmother, when about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, she had a bad accident in her shop where she had a saw that would cut material, and she accidentally cut off her arm without almost all the way through. And they rushed her to the hospital, to Bellevue Hospital, a helicopter, and they saved her arm. But for months, she had zero feeling in her hand, to the point that one time her hand was very close to the fire when she was cooking, and she didn't feel it. and she burnt herself. She didn't feel it because it wasn't that the body wasn't being affected. It's that her nerves hadn't grown back yet. Later on, it all came back. She could not feel her hand at all. It was like touching wood. She didn't feel anything. And therefore, even though the hand got a pretty significant burn, nevertheless, she didn't feel it because there was no sense. Now, the fact that she didn't feel it didn't change the reality. When someone touches a person that doesn't have feeling because their nerves are damaged, you can't say, well, I guess you're not touching me. No, I guess you can't feel that I'm touching you. The reality is that right now I'm touching you. Right now the heat is on your hand, except you don't feel it. This is the truth of how it is with us doing a mitzvah. At that moment, the bond and oneness is incredible. It is powerful, is unimaginable, but we don't feel it because we have lost a sensitivity. Where tzaddik is fully in tune to the sensitive, beautiful sweetness of a mitzvah that's taking place and the truth of what's happening. It covers the eyes of the soul to see the truth of God. Unlike their forefathers, we're able to see the truth. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, King David, etc. We're able to see the truth of what mitzvah is being done. He uses an expression here, which I just want to explain. It's a beautiful expression. He says, "Shira'u olamam b'chayehem." They saw their world in their lifetime. What does that mean? They saw their world in a lifetime. So it's really a beautiful little point here that it's really beautiful. What is that? Olam here refers to the world to come. Olam haba. After a person lives a life of this world, the next world is where they have all the blessings, the rewards, the results of all that you do in this world. So when a person in this life does a mitzvah, does an act of kindness, respects an older person, gives charity to the poor, lights a Shabbos candle, says a prayer, says the Shema, etc., does Kiddush Friday night. At that time, whatever blessings you may have in your lifetime and physically because of it, has no comparison to the incredible goodness that's going to come when Mashiach comes, or when a person passes away and goes to that time and place where you see the truth of life. There's a tremendous reward and a tremendous goodness that's given to a person for the mitzvah. To understand this, it's not that someone who was good gets to be treated well and someone who wasn't good doesn't get treated well. It's like putting money in a bank. Every time you put money in a bank, it sits there until you go and access it. There are times that you can't access the money for whatever reason. Your entire lifetime, our entire lifetime, every mitzvah we do is putting money in the bank. And when we go to the bank account to open it up, that's what's there. So what happens is we don't see the benefit, excuse me, of every deposit, of every time we put money into the bank, so to speak. We don't see the benefit of every mitzvah. But every single mitzvah is creating a reality right now, a reality of tremendous blessing, of light, of goodness that we can't see. When do we see it? When we're no longer limited by our physical bodies. Excuse me. When we're no longer limited by our physical bodies, at that time, we will suddenly benefit from all the things that we've done. Which means, when will we see the benefit? And by the way, the cool thing is, in our lifetimes, we forget 99% of the good that we've done. We forget the time as a child we gave somebody our locker, we gave somebody our place in line, our seat on the bus, a piece of our candy. As young people, as adults, when we went to put on tefillin or light a Shabbos candle or went to a service, we forget over the years, we forget the millions and millions of mitzvahs that we've done. God didn't forget. And they're all sitting, no matter if you've done them and you became less religious, or you never were very religious, or you were always religious but forgot things that you've done. All those good things that you've done are sitting and waiting for you. You just can't see it yet. And when the time comes when you're no longer limited by a physical body, you will see the tremendous, tremendous load of gems of beauty, of blessing, of light, of goodness that you created. And that's what the world to come is. Olam haba. A tzaddik sees that today. See, we only see it. We can't. When I put on tefillin, I don't see suddenly, wow, it's incredible what's going on here. I put on tefillin. I hope it's a good thing. I hope I did it with the right intentions. I hope I did it pretty good. Do I see the tremendous oneness of God's coming down into my own personal space and creating a light and a power? No. But after 120 years, or after Mashiach comes, we're suddenly going to be no more limits of concealment. And we'll see, wow, to enjoy the tremendous investment that was made over the last 80, 70, 80, 90 years. And this is what it means. Tzaddikim, they see olamam. They see the world to come today. They don't have to wait till they get to see it. When a tzaddik sees a mitzvah happening, they see it as it is. There's actually an incredible story. It's a long story, but I'll say it really briefly. One of the great Hasidic brilliant scholars and masters that existed was actually a student, a Chassid of the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, a student of the second Rebbe, the middle Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek once sent him to visit the Ruzhner. The Ruzhner was a great Rebbe. We'll talk about him a little later also today. We'll get to him. The Ruzhner was a great master, great holy person. And he, in general, on Fridays, was not available for anyone. He was a very, in a secluded state, Friday, getting ready for Shabbos spiritually. As a matter of fact, the Alter Rebbe writes in the Hasidic discourse, is a very interesting thing. He says Shabbos is not just Shabbos. Shabbos really is every day of the week, in a certain moment of the day. Just like you have Shabbos of the week, you have every day has a Shabbos. That's when you daven. The moment of davening is the Shabbos of the day. And after the course of 6 days of charging that Shabbos of the day, you get a full day of Shabbos. That's the result of 6 days of davening that creates a very powerful Shabbos experience. And only then could you really appreciate Shabbos. There's an expression that says only one who prepares for Shabbos eats on Shabbos. That's simple. If you don't make the chicken soup, unless someone brought it to you, you're not having chicken soup. The spiritual idea is if you don't prepare for Shabbos, you can't fully appreciate Shabbos. Okay. So the Ruzhner, this holy Rabbi, Yisrael of Ruzhin, would every Friday take time for himself. Meanwhile, this great Hasidic scholar, this great master, was sent by the Tzemach Tzedek to go and talk to him about some important matter that was challenging the Russian or Polish Jewry, wherever they took place at that time. I believe it was the Polish area. The Russian was in Poland, I believe. So, and he had come from Russia. He comes and arrives, this great scholar, arrives at the home of the Ruzhner, and the secretary or the assistant tells him, the Ruzhner doesn't see guests on Friday. He doesn't take guests. He says, tell him I was sent by the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, to talk to him. He hears this message. He says, send him in. They sit and they talk and they talk and they talk for 4 hours. He talks to him, and this great Rabbi of Isaac of Hummel, who is this scholar talking to the Ruzhner, is feeling very comfortable. This great tzaddik is talking to him like a friend. And he's being so friendly and so warm and so nice. And they talk literally until the moment that Shabbos begins. As Shabbos begins, the secretary comes in and says, Rebbe, Shabbos starts right now and in a few minutes. So he puts down his paper. He's actually smoking a pipe. He puts down his pipe and he walks to the window. And he calls over the Ruzhner, the Rebbe. This is not a Chabad Rebbe, but he's one of the great Rebbes of all time. He says to Rabbi Isaac of Hulman, who himself was a great scholar, he says, do you want to come and see what Shabbos looks like? He says, come to the window. He comes to the window and he looks outside and he sees it looks like, outside, trees, grass, wind, whatever, sky. And he sees the Ruzhner's face is like a fire, a flaming fire of warmth and of intensity, obviously experiencing something otherworldly. And he was completely shook up. And Rabbi Isaac was shook up. And he said he realized that as friendly as the Rebbe was being to him, he had no idea what a Rebbe really was until he saw how a Rebbe sees the world differently. What does that mean? Here we got a chance to experience how a Rebbe sees the world not like we see it. We see, okay, it's a kosher, it's mezuzah, it's tefillin. If you have the ability to see past what our eyes are showing us in the physical sense, there's a tremendous power and intensity to a mitzvah that unfortunately the average person can't see. And that's what he's saying here. Only great masters like Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, they saw the truth. They were living a different dimension, which explains many of the stories of the Torah. Why did they do this? How did they do that? They didn't see it like we see it. They didn't see the reality like we saw it, and we'll get to more of that soon. Now we come to a very interesting thing. The Tehillim, the famous book of Tehillim, probably one of the greatest works. My birthday actually has a quote there on the Rebbe's diary of each day of the year with an insight and a thought. For my birthday, which was this past Shabbos, the thought is, if we only knew the power of Tehillim and its effect in the heavens to elicit blessings for our children and our family, we would say Tehillim the whole day long. That's what it says. So about Tehillim, it says, who composed Tehillim? So the credit goes, of course, to King David. But the truth is there were 10 authors of Tehillim. King David did the first 73 chapters, different ways to say what he did, but there were 10 chapters by Moshe Rabbeinu from 90 to 100. There were chapters by Asaph, there were chapters by Adam, there were various great people. There were 10 authors. King David did the bulk of it, and he also compiled it. He gets the credit as his book because he compiled it. And he brought it all together with prophecy, took all the things that were written from other great souls. One of the authors is a person named Asaph. Asaph lived in the times of King David. He was a Levite, a musician, and he was also in charge of various, out of the forests or different, I forget what different jobs he had for the king at that time, but I think he was involved with the woods or the foresting or something. But he was a very intense, great, holy person, not a prophet, but he was like many great people who weren't officially prophets, were able to say things with divine inspiration. It's called Ruach HaKodesh. It's different than prophecy. He, in chapter 73, he has the following quote. And here's it is. And this is what Asaph writes with divine inspiration. And he writes it on behalf of all the people that would come in the future generations of exile. He lived in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, the first temple. There was no exile then. At the first temple, the Jewish people were living in the dream. After King David came King Solomon. It was an unbelievable holy time. Nevertheless, he writes a prophecy or a chapter of Tehillim which alludes to the times of exile that we're living in today. And I'm first going to explain the point of the chapter, how it's written simply, and then how Chassidus explains this chapter. Simply, he writes as follows. If you look at the chapter later, look it up. I meant to bring a Tehillim today to read it inside, but it doesn't matter. In chapter 73, he explains that he was bothered very much. Why do the wicked prosper? Why is it that people who mock God, who challenge God and voice their mockery against Hashem, why do they seem to prosper, whereas the good people don't seem to have it so good? And then he says, I came to the Beis HaMikdash, and my eyes were open to see that all the gain that the wicked people have, it's only temporary, and actually is going to make their downfall greater. And just as a side note, it's brought down about Haman. It says about Haman, Purim is coming up in just a few weeks, coming up faster than we know it. It says about Haman that why did Hashem make him so wealthy and so powerful and so great? Originally, he was a poor barber. As you know, the backstory to Purim, he was a nobody. Haman was a nobody, just a regular, good, solid anti-Semite. And he just hated Jews and wanted to kill Jews. And later, he became very wealthy and powerful to maybe go ahead and do it, God forbid. It says, why did Hashem do it? So it says a metaphor there is given about this guy, that this nobody who's standing on the side of the king's walking, and he screams out and insults and throws garbage at the king, and disgusted, which the king should really have him executed. The king takes him, tells him, I'm so impressed with your stature, I want to make you a minister in my court. And he gives him money and wealth, and he gives him a good place. And after a year of living in this palace, the king says, and now I'm going to hang you. And the people are like, what's happening here? He says, if I would have hanged him a year ago, he wouldn't care. His life is worthless to him. He meant nothing. He wouldn't care. What I did first was I lifted him up high. And now when I hang him, it's a much greater punishment to him because he has so much in life, he doesn't want to die. Now he's getting a punishment. So it says God does that to wicked people. He raises them up before he drops them down. That's what Asaph says. But he uses a very interesting expression. He says, I was like, before I came to be aware of this, I was a boor. Boor means like somebody who is empty-minded, a person that doesn't get things, a person that's not clever. And I was like an animal, like a beast, like a sheep, like a cow. And I did not know God, yet God was with me. That's what he says. So we understand that he's describing himself as a person that did not get it. He looked around, he was disappointed by God was sort of letting bad people prosper. And now I became wiser. God's with me. The Alter Rebbe gives such a beautiful insight into this verse that's going to change it. He says, actually, Asaph was referring to us. What is us? We are the people that are like sheep. We don't get it. You see, when he says, I am like, the verse has two parts. I am like a boor. I am like a guy who's not clever. He's referring to himself. I did not understand God's ways. So I came into the temple. When a temple, the holiness, the spirituality allowed me to see the bigger picture. And I realized that the wicked are not so fortunate. It looks good to them, but it's not so good. The second half of the verse, but I am like a cow. It doesn't say a cow. I'm like a beast, which could be a sheep, a goat, or a cow, that does not know, yet God is with me, referring to us today. What does that mean? We are like sheep. What's a sheep? A sheep is, and it could be any animal. I'm just using a sheep as it could be a goat, it could be a horse, it could be a cow, it could be a dog, it could be a cat. As beautiful and as wonderful each animal is with the gifts God gave them, every animal is given tremendous gifts by God to have a tremendous sense of smell or creativity to build nests and dams and like honey. Every animal has a creativity and a genius, but none of them have the ability to comprehend ideas and be motivated by them. None of the animals can walk by a Mona Lisa painting and go, "Wow, what was the guy thinking when they made this painting? What were they thinking? What was Da Vinci thinking? I think it was Da Vinci who made it. What was he thinking about when he made this painting? You look at the Starry Night by this guy or famous pieces of literature or poetry. Wow, what a sheep never think that. Why? Because they don't have a system. They're oblivious to the depth and brilliance of any thought. They might be clever to do what sheep do. They're clever to do. Dogs are clever to do what dogs do, but not in a way where they can comprehend and internalize ideas to be motivated and inspired by them. It's not possible by an animal. It's not their nature. They don't have the ability. The same thing he says, we are like sheep. We are standing right next to the greatest gift, the greatest brilliant concept in the world, and we're oblivious to it. We don't even know it's there. As a matter of fact, there's a story with the Berditchever, the great Levi Yitzchak Berditchever once said, he said, if you would bring a pair of tzitzis into the Garden of Eden, into the heavens, it would cause a firestorm of upheaval when they saw such a greatness. Today, person puts tzitzis on, doesn't feel it. Wow, tzitzis here. Light a Shabbos candle. Okay, it's nice. It feels inspiring. I feel good. It feels warm. My family feels good. I connect to Hashem. Where's the panic and the dread? As we'll see in 2 lines from now. Because we can't see it. We're oblivious to it. We don't realize somebody's oblivious to walking on the edge of a cliff is unafraid. It's amazing. I once did a hike in Israel, a place called Mount Arbel, which if you haven't done this hike, it's actually a pretty cool hike to do, especially for guys like me that are terrified of heights. You're literally walking down a cliff on these very narrow trails, about 2 or 3 feet wide, and you're very high up. You go back and forth. The funny part is there are, I don't want to say what exactly, but there are evidence of cows that were there before you. They left evidence behind, and you see footprints of them. The cows go down this. They have no concern about falling off the cliff. They're not worried. They just go and trot down. People that are internalized and think, what would happen if I would fall, if I would trip? Suddenly, I have all these concerns. You have to be in tune to the danger. It's like the metaphor once gave about this. The king once had this diamond that was worth, let's say, $1 billion. And the diamond expert could not cut it because he realized if he cut it, even though it was a simple cut, it would change it from being worth $1 billion to be worth, $5 million. And would be a disaster. So he took his apprentice, who was not so wise, not so good, but a decent cutter. And he said, I have this job for you. Want to cut this up for me? And the apprentice did it, no problem. He didn't know what was on hand. If he would have realized, it's like the guy at the end of the Super Bowl, 3-2, and you have one chance to, not the Super Bowl, sorry, the World Series, and you have one chance to hit a home run, a grand slam, the intensity could itself make you fail. The knowing what's going on is impactful in a tremendous way. Angels could never handle a mitzvah. They'd fall apart. They'd blow up. We have no idea what we're doing. We put on tefillin and we light a Shabbos candle and we go to shul. We put a mezuzah. We make kiddush. We're like nonchalantly doing all these things. Thankfully, they say ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is bliss. We are relaxed and at peace because we don't understand what's going on. And that's what he says. Sorry, skip 2 lines here. So what did Asaf say? He was talking about the Jewish people in exile. He says, Va'ani ba'ar. I, referring to myself, I was a fool and did not know God's ways. Behemoth, you see, but I was an animal. I was like a cow or a sheep, like a goat. Imach, when I was with you, Vani Tamid Imach, but nevertheless I was with you. And he's telling you, even though you Jewish people living in 2,000 years from now, in the year 2021, and you're doing a mitzvah, and you don't feel it because you're like a sheep, don't worry, God is with you. The fact that you don't see it doesn't make it any less. There's a story of the 5th Rebbe of Chabad. The 5th Rebbe of Chabad was once taking a carriage ride. And the carriage rides in those days was like, I guess, like an Uber, that you had a choice to take your own, or you could take a group one, people who join. So he once joined, and in that ride was a number of maskilim. The maskilim of those days, and this is talking about the early 1800s, the early 1900s, the maskilim were the enlightened ones who were very anti-religious, but they were very intellectual. They were called the Enlightenment Movement. It started in the times of the Tzemach Tzedek, and it went through till it sort of petered out mainly, I guess, in the early 1900s. But it was a movement of tremendously intellectual Jewish people that did not believe in God, not believe in spirituality, and only believe what their eyes could see. They were the intellectuals, so to speak, the elite intellectuals. And he was once in a wagon with three of them going on a journey. He was going to one place, and they were going to another destination. And they started talking to him about, how do you know angels really exist? And he was talking to them, explaining to them how to know angels really exist. And he's talking to them. After a while, he sees not really having an effect on them. So he says to them, what do you think? If we can get into the mind of the horse right now, who is taking us on this journey, what do you think the horse is thinking? He said, I'll tell you, the horse is probably thinking, I can't wait to get to my destination because that's where I get good oats. Whenever I get to my destination, I get oats. I'm on the way for oats. He said, what's the wagon driver thinking? He said, the wagon driver is thinking that when I get to my destination, I will get paid and I can go have a good supper, a good lunch, or a good dinner, whatever, and get a good night's sleep. He says, what are you guys thinking? You're going to a convention. We're discussing here angels. You're going to a convention to analyze deep ideas. He says, you think as a horse is thinking about the oats, the angels are not any angels. Meaning you think because the horse is not aware of the destination and what's going on, it makes the truth less true. Just because we don't see the truth around us, we don't see the Wi-Fi, we don't see godliness, doesn't mean it's not intense. The awareness requires a special sensitivity, which we don't have, but it doesn't make it any less true. And therefore, we use the metaphor of like sheep or like an animal. An animal could be close to the most brilliant poetry, art, and he doesn't appreciate it. He's not going to be moved to be emotional. By the way, even though there are certain times that animals can hear music and you see them get soulful, it's actually there are concepts on some level, but not in the way of an intensity to be inspired, to change yourself, to go to a new level of existence, etc. Last two lines on the page. Even though I am like a behemoth, I'm like an animal. When I'm with you, meaning I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm right now with the ultimate bond with oneness and God. The heavens are churning, the mountains are moving, the whole world is in a whirlwind. Nevertheless, I don't feel it. But nafshi, in my heart, it doesn't feel me. I don't feel it at all. Why? Or how do you know? Because if I would feel it, I would first have a tremendous panic and fear. I would do a mitzvah, an angel. This is a line that is brought down in Tanya and other places that is mind-boggling. It says, if an angel, and not just any angel, it says a malach matat, he is the chief archangel in charge of all the angels. If he'd walk into a gathering of 10 Jews, hey, we have 10 Jews right here, it's cool. If we would walk into a gathering of 10 Jews, he says we have to run out of the room out of being overwhelmed by the level of holiness that's there. The Alter Rebbe uses this as a reason or as an instruction why when you come to shul in the morning and you have 10 people there, you should not talk foolish talk. He said you're in a place that even the angel of angels is afraid to come in that room. The Malach Matat can't walk in there because of the power of light that's there. And because we're oblivious to it, so we're sitting and schmoozing about sports, about Biden, about this. He says, do you realize what's going on here? You're talking, and we'll circle back to this as we say today in a few moments to explain this idea a little more clear. But the bottom line is, we are unaware. If we were aware of what's happening by lighting a Shabbos candle, we would literally break out into a sweat and we'd be filled with panic, which would immediately be followed by a tremendous joy and love, realizing that the great fear that we feel is actually a power and a source that loves us and cares for us and accepts us, and that will give us a tremendous love. And that's why and immediately after that, you'll have a tremendous, tremendous love and warm feeling, like a burning fire, just like the experience that Tzaddik has. If we were not living in the world of concealment, if we were not like sheep, if we could see the truth, if the shade over our eyes could be taken off, if the sensory of our nerves could be restored and feel the one touching us, we'd be like the tzaddikim shenizdachech chumram, that refined their coarseness. They're no longer material. There's nothing physical about it. A lot of times we say about the Rebbe that he never really passed away. What does that mean? We say Kaddish for him, we lit a candle, he was buried. What does that mean, never passed away? It means he was never about his meat and bones and flesh. He was his spirituality. So of course his body passed away. That's not who he was. He was the soul, he was his identity, he was the mitzvahs, he was the Torah. And that can pass away. Of course the physical part passes away. But the question is, who are you? Are you your plate of chicken? Or are you're putting on lighting a Shabbos candle? Are you your class of Torah? Who are you? And that defines that by long enough working and developing self, Your sense of self doesn't matter. There's a phenomenal story of the Tzemach Tzedek after Yom Kippur. I don't know if it's a one-time event or every single year. The Tzemach Tzedek was the third Rebbe. After Yom Kippur, immediately, when everyone broke the fast, he would go and run into his study and sit and learn Talmud for many hours. Why would he do that? Because the whole Yom Kippur, there's no time for learning Talmud. Davening is the entire day. The small break that you have, you say Tehillim. So when did you learn them? He hadn't learned Talmud in 26 hours or more. So the second it was over, he ran to study and he sat there for hours all night long and studying Talmud. See, some people, when the fast is over, run have food. Some people run home to check on their kids. Some people run home to study Torah, because that is, imagine you're very hungry, but you're also freezing cold. You're going outside. You put a coat on. You won't say, well, I'm hungry, so I won't feel. What is the primary feeling you have right this second? By the Tzemach Tzedek, it was the need and desire to study some Talmud. By other people, it's the need to break your fast and have a coffee, have some cake. And that's because we're normal. We're in tune to our physical needs. Some people don't live with their physical existence. They, of course, will eat eventually, but a minute amount and sleep a minute amount, as, if you understand it, great professors, scientists, thinkers, inventors, they can go a day without eating because their mind is occupied with figuring out how to make a light bulb, how to make electricity work, or how to make, how gravity works. And they can forget, they can run out of the bathtub, when they realize, without clothes, realizing, hey, I just figured out the reason for this and how this works. Because their mind and soul was not living with their present. They were involved with something deeper, bigger, greater, grander. Same thing as spiritually. You could be involved with a greater, grander, more spiritual existence, and it comes to the point by a tzaddik that your physical body doesn't exist anymore. We, by the way, will never get to that point. Don't worry about it, or don't try and do it. But to appreciate the truth is helpful. We can't get there because it requires being born different, as we'll see in a moment. And we know this idea of das. What does das mean? Asaf said, I am like a behema, I don't know. The word das, the word know, comes from the same word as Adam knew Eve. Know does not just mean that I know the person. That's the simple translation. But know means, that the biblical sense, is an intense intimacy, becoming one. If an idea doesn't affect you, then you don't really know it. It's like, a person could know that cigarettes are bad for you. But the truth is, most people won't stop smoking. A person can know drinking is bad for them, but they won't stop drinking, etc., etc. A person could know the importance of being careful with a certain disease. When do they suddenly start being careful? When it hits them hard. God forbid a brother or sister dies from that disease. Or something happens and you realize, you go to a doctor and he shows you your lungs on an image. You go, whoa. Or you see how many neurons you fried with all the scotch you have. Suddenly you'll go, whoa. What happens? Now I know. Until now, I had the information in my head, but that didn't affect me. You see, having information and das and knowing biblically is two different things. Information is like studying a court case, like what's fascinating? The judge made such and such a ruling. Das means the ruling is about me. Now I'm in a panic. You just put me in jail for God forbid how long. In other words, when the information becomes personal and affects you, that's das. What did Asaf say? And I don't know. I didn't use the word das. He's saying, we could know an idea that the spirituality right now is very powerful, but it's not going to affect us till we see it. You could know about a danger. So interesting, people living in California, a lot of times, know a possibility of an earthquake. Suddenly they hear one, they feel, whoa, maybe I should move out of town. You saw it in the valley. My son moved to the valley recently, about 20-something years ago, a little more. It was a famous Northridge or something, whatever it's called, earthquake. And the neighborhood emptied out. What happened? Don't you know there's an earthquake? You guys know it, but now we felt it. Now we know, and many homes were for sale. Businesses closed, people moved out. Hello, chances are next one's going to happen in 200 years. But now you know it. It's much different than just having the information in your head. Nevertheless, even though you don't see it, it doesn't change the reality. And this is the key. What he wants to say is the fact that when you do a mitzvah, and you do it right now, Hashem bonds with you, that intimacy we spoke in the last couple classes. The fact that you don't feel it doesn't change the truth. The fact that you don't know that this is going on inside of you doesn't change the truth because you don't know. It's the fact. This is the reality. Sorry, I skipped the line again. Because the ignorance and the concealment of your coarseness of your body that doesn't allow you to see godliness, doesn't change the truth. So the fact that you can't see Wi-Fi doesn't make it less there, and the fact that you can't see God's unity with you at the time you do a mitzvah doesn't make it less true. And this is the important idea. We're gonna try and finish the chapter now, but this is the important idea that he wants to give over in this last part of the chapter. That just because we don't see, and now more importantly, we don't feel the effect of a mitzvah, the effect of a Torah study, don't for 1 second think that it's any less. And he's going to prove it or make the point to us by showing sort of the negative side of it. If God forbid we do a sin, what happens? And seemingly, well, I'll say it inside. And now we can understand the tremendous gravity of doing work on Shabbos. Doing work on Shabbos is one of the more serious crimes that a person could do. There are certain crimes that a person would do. I'm not talking about today when people grow up without a knowledge of Torah and mitzvahs and without their families and parents doing it. We're not comparing it to today. We're talking about a time when the Jewish community and everyone's knowledgeable, everyone knows, everyone grew up with this. And now a person decides, I'm not going to be careful for whatever reason. To understand the depth and the seriousness of it, we'll understand why is it such a big deal that if someone works on Shabbos or someone, let's say I lit a candle on Shabbos, big deal. I lit a candle, what's the big deal? And we say, or for the same matter, chametz on Pesach. Hashavah kol nefesh. We say this is the same damage to everybody, whether you're a great tzaddik and whether you're a simple, let's call it nobody, even though that's not a nice word. You're a simple person. He says, seemingly, which you would think, imagine if you wear a beautiful suit and you get a stain on it, you should be very bothered by it. Hey, I have a beautiful suit, I got a stain. This is terrible. What's if you're wearing an old pair of jeans that's torn and used for painting and you get a stain? Who cares? Who cares if I was a real perfect holy person and a spiritual giant and a tzaddik and I went on Shabbos and lit a candle, or I went on Pesach and I had a cookie? I can understand the tremendous damage that's being done to my tremendous sanctity, my holy self. You're breaking the spiritual giant reality. But if I'm just another guy, I'm just a yokel, I'm just a this, what's the big difference if I lit a candle on Shabbos? What's the big difference if I had a cookie on Pesach? Big deal. It's not. The answer is you don't understand. Shabbos is not about you being a good person or not a good person, a righteous person. Shabbos is about you in a place of intense holiness. Shabbos is intense holiness. Pesach is intense holiness. And you're doing an act of disrespect and disregard, more than disrespect, disregard to it. There's a story told about the Ruzhner. I mentioned him before, about the story with him when he was visited by Rabbi Isaac of Hummel. But when the Ruzhner was a small child of 5 years old, he was learning where the teacher was telling what happens with somebody pre-phones and pre-iPhones. This is going back to the early 1900s. He said, what's if a person gets lost in the woods and doesn't know, sorry, the Ruzhner was earlier, in the mid-1800s. But what's if a person gets lost in the woods and the wilderness and doesn't know when's Shabbos? So the Gemara has a whole discussion of what you do. Do you count the first day as Shabbos, next 6 days as weekdays? You count 6 days first, and the seventh day you keep as Shabbos. How to conduct yourself, the whole discussion how to do it. Very interesting idea. Very interesting discussions. And he raises his hand, he says, I don't understand. The teacher said, what can't you understand? He says, how can you not know if it's Shabbos? Just look outside. It looks like Shabbos. It's like, look at the skies, it's Shabbos. Here was a 5-year-old kid who saw Shabbos because he was going to be the great Rishon. He was a born holy person. To him, Shabbos looked different than the week. The fact that we don't see it doesn't change anything. In other words, the greatness of Shabbos is not that we are supposed to be limited in our activity on Shabbos. No. Shabbos right now standing in front of us is a tremendous revelation of godliness that we can't even begin to imagine. It is so powerful and so intense that we saw the face of the Rishon when he was an older person, standing by the window, his face shining and flushed with intense, enjoying the holiness. We don't see it. How nice is it when you have someone who's holy and important, the king standing there, and you're eating a slice of pizza, or you're doing something disregarding it. There's a famous discussion, we mentioned this in the very beginning of Tanya, about one of the great sins that's considered the great sins in the world is the sin of wasting seed. If a man wastes seed, it's considered, and the Christian has a community as a whole view on it, it's because of the pleasure. It has nothing to do with pleasure. Judaism likes pleasure. It has to do with God gave us the greatest, most powerful gift, the ability to create a child. And if you take it and disregard it, it's the greatest sin. It's like someone today who found a vaccine for healing, for real, for once and for all, this whole pandemic. And someone just, spilling them on the floor, using them as target practice. Are you kidding me? This is the greatest resource we have. We have so much more of it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is such a disrespect to go and smash these test tubes, whatever. Shabbos is such a sanctity and holiness, and to bring into it something that Shabbos is allergic to. So imagine the king comes in who's allergic to peanuts, and you pull out a package of Planters peanuts. You go, hey, you want some? The king is allergic to peanuts. It's the worst thing for him. Shabbos in its holiness state is allergic to certain behaviors. And therefore, it makes no difference if you're a holy man, or if you're a great man, if you're a simple boor, if you're a simple nobody, because it's not about you. It's about the reality taking place all around you. There are right now the Shabbos in the world, and you're doing something disregarded. The problem is, we can't see Shabbos. If we see Shabbos, we'd be the Rishner. We'd see holiness. It says if we would see the holiness of the world, nobody would ever sin. Who's going to sin, you know? And that's why he says that same thing on Pesach. Same thing on Pesach. If we would see the sanctity and the power that comes in on Pesach, we'd understand how could a person go and do something like that? Not because of you are doing a sin. That's a separate detail. You and your 630 commandments, you got to work on yourself. But besides your own personal journey of trying to grow as a Jew, as a God's personal employee in this world, there's a big picture to realize that you don't know what's going on around you. There's a world of tremendous activity right now. I always think about this. The amount of opportunity of catching radio channels, fax channels, phone conversations. If I could see it, I'd be dizzy spinning on my head. Imagine you could hear every single channel on the radio in this room, and you're able to pick it up with your brain right now. You'd go out of your box with the noise and the traffic and the distractions of faxes and emails and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. You couldn't handle it. Hashem, in his kindness, made us unaware of it. Only our computer senses it, our certain devices sense it. Same thing is with godliness. If we know what we're doing to the system around us by a little candle on Shabbos, we would never do it. And that's why we judge the same way, no matter how holy you are, how unholy you are, because both of it is equal disregard for the holiness that's there. Meaning, here's a phenomenal idea that comes out of this. There's not more holiness by a holy person than a not holy person. There's just more awareness. And it's a very key idea in Yiddishkeit. The Chassidus tells us, a person who's holy and a tzaddik is not really holier. He just has less blockage to see it. He lives with that truth, and we don't see the truth. And it's a very eye-opening and sort of uplifting concept to realize the holiness I have is tremendous. Unfortunately, I can't see it. It's like you have a checkbook and you realize that you actually have an account with $1 billion. The other guy has a little money in his house. You don't realize, just write the check out, you'll have the money. You have it all right next to you. And therefore he says there's one Torah for all Jewish people. We don't have a separate Torah for the righteous people, a separate Torah for the tzaddikim, a separate Torah for the simple people, a separate Torah for the guys who are lax. It's all one Torah, one truth, one reality. The question is how in tune we are and how much we see and how much we don't see. Therefore, the laws apply equally to everybody because the spiritual truth, the effect of a mitzvah is the same for every person. The only question is if we see it. Then the Alter Rebbe finishes off the chapter with a parentheses. And I'll just tell you outside briefly, it's a phenomenal idea. Maybe next week, if you'd like, we can take a few minutes to talk about this properly. The short of it is he asks a question. The grammar, the syntax doesn't seem right. It says everything in the singular, but then it uses the word behemoth. So we go back to Asaph. When he said, I am like a sheep, or I'm like a cow, I'm a behemoth, he used the plural, I am like beasts. It doesn't say I'm like a beast. Everything is, I don't know, I don't feel, I'm like beasts. Either you're a beast or we're beasts. You can't, I am beasts, at least usually. And the insight is, that the Alter Rebbe explains here, is a phenomenal idea that there's two levels of behemoth. A behemoth means I don't understand. One person doesn't understand because I'm a behemoth, I'm unaware of my surroundings, because I'm not so wise, I'm not so spiritual, I'm not so in touch with the spiritual truth around me. That's one level. Another level of behemoth is that I am spiritually aware, and I am a holy man, and I am a great tzaddik. But nevertheless, the truth is, I don't understand what's going on by God because God is so much greater. Meaning, in truth, the greatness of God even supersedes me. I, of course, understand tremendously, but meaning I being the theoretical tzaddik. I understand tremendously, but I'm still nevertheless like a behemoth, because at the end of the day, God's wisdom and knowledge and intensity is something I can never fully engage because I'm a human being, I'm a creation. And therefore he says the word behemoth, he says, because at either level he's telling us, don't feel bad, Mr. Simple Jew, that you're a behemoth. At the end of the day, everyone is that level of an animal compared to God. Whether you're, meaning, no matter how brilliant you're going to find these ants or these insects, at the end of the day, compared to Einstein, they're all the same. Meaning, as smart, let's take even an easier example. As smart as the third graders are, you have the smartest third grader that can read already, pretty quickly and knows 4 plus 4 is 8, knows it in a second. And the kid that can't still do 1 plus 1, one guy's much smarter. Okay, you know what, everybody? We have different levels in our world here in third grade. When we go into Rabbi Einstein's class, Rabbi Einstein, Mr. Einstein, we go into his class, we are all the same because to all of us becomes something so simple compared to him. And this is the idea of the understanding the depth and the true nature of all of us compared to God. So what's the final analysis in this chapter? That when someone does a mitzvah, there's something called reciprocating love, and that's the tremendous warmth and reaching out that God does to us at a moment of a mitzvah. And even before we do a mitzvah, but certainly when we do a mitzvah, that Hashem reaches out to us like a king that comes down to the garbage heap, etc. God took us out of Egypt, God comes to us. And that love that we have is a responsive love, not that we have to think and meditate how great God is. It's just a natural, responsive, reflective love that we respond to Hashem and it's reaching out to us. And even if we don't feel it, it's not because it's not there, it's because we don't have the ability to sense the truth of what's going on. This is the end of chapter 46. And next week, God willing, we'll begin chapter 40.